Hey everyone. This week, Brittany and I are diving into coffee and the impacts that coffee can have on our digestive system, skin health, nervous system, hormones, and sleep. And in Ayurveda, we don't look at plants or food as being good or bad. It always depends on the individual. So, we're going to talk about which constitutions and diagnoses and symptoms coffee can be considered medicinal for, and other situations where coffee could actually be the main driver of imbalance. And as usual, we're also going to offer some middle ground. So, subtle shifts in how you're drinking coffee or things that you can add to your coffee if it is adding to some imbalance in your mind or body. So, we hope you find this helpful. And if you do, we'd love to have you leave a positive review on whatever platform that you're listening on and tell us why. Thanks so much for being here. Welcome to the Ayurveda for Women's Health podcast, where we simplify ancient Ayurvedic wisdom into practical guidance for everyday life. Between the overwhelming wellness trends, quick fixes, and conflicting health advice out there, we return to a science that has been around for thousands of years. I'm Rita, an Ayurvedic health counselor.
And I'm Brittni, an Ayurveda practitioner. In a world that disconnects us from our bodies, we are here to guide you back. Through body literacy, practical tools, and time-tested science, we will help you step boldly into a more empowered, aligned version of yourself. So let's dive in. This podcast is for educational purposes only and is not medical advice. Views expressed do not represent our employers. So Rita, I don't know if you noticed in my background, but I have rearranged my entire house.
Oh yeah, you're in a different spot.
Yes. Yeah, I've been incorporating Vastu into our home, which has been really exciting. And so, yeah, it's been really interesting to begin to see what I can apply just with what's in front of me in my house and start to play around with it. But yeah, it's essentially what I did was started by understanding like where's the center of the house and then the north, south, east, west locations. And then essentially it's becoming aware of the different energies of those locations and how prana moves throughout the space and throughout the house. So not to get too far in the weeds with it, because I think we could talk a lot about Vastu, but essentially what I did was all of the heavy furniture, like our couches and coffee table and like living room setting was in the northeast corner of the house. And the northeast corner represents, if we think about the energy that's moving in the northeast corner, it's like the first light from the day, right? So it's gentle and it's soft and it's this new beginning energy. And so we want that to have a really easy flow into the house and into the space. And then be able to have it move throughout the house, right? But have like grounded energy in the house as well to like hold that new energy. And then eventually it'll circulate out, that prana circulates out and move on its way. But so I had it backwards where my heavy furniture was in the northeast corner and I moved it all to the south and like the southwest corner where it's more beneficial to lean into heavy, dense, solid qualities in that corner of the house because it is holding that energy, right? It creates this like grounding anchor as that new energy comes in, as opposed to if the south wall was like wide open with windows or glass or some visual airflow or some like flow that would just move quickly out of the house. All that prana would just get sucked out right away. And so by having lighter elements, airy elements, not having anything blocked in that area, like no heavy furniture, like moving bookshelves, but I know there's still some things I need to tweak. But not having like heavy elements in the northeast corner of the house, moving them to the south, it allows that new energy to move in for the day and to circulate the house and then move its way out. There's a lot of nuance to that I could go into. I'm trying to just like give you a little summary. But that's what I did. So I flip-flopped my living room and my working space so that my working space is in a place that is honoring the air and the mobile element. So temporary conversations, like meeting with clients, right? The northeast and the north corner of the house is where that air element is predominant. And to honor that, we want to have things stay light and airy and flowing. And then the same way in the south, having the heavy, dense furniture there is a way of like grounding that energy in and creating stability and strength for the house, as opposed to that later in the day type of energy. If we think about even the sun, it's going to be heating, right? And so we want to protect the house from that very hot, drying energy. So we're getting this like nice, cool, mobile, pranic energy in the morning. It's circulating the house and then it's leaving eventually. So that's what I did. I switched my working space and my living room to the opposite sides of the house.
That's so fascinating. I'm looking forward to hearing how that feels for you. I'm sure, you have to kind of settle into it a bit, but definitely keep us posted on how that feels. I haven't done a ton with Vastu, but I can remember when we were learning about it in Ayurveda school. I remember there were a few people in our cohort who, through Vastu recommendations, had switched the direction that their bed was facing and found they were people who chronically were challenged with sleep or falling asleep, staying asleep, and noticed a difference just with that and the different energetics that, as you were describing, are naturally connected to and correlated to certain directions. So it's so fascinating. I'm glad that it's an area you're deepening into so that I can learn from you. And because I feel like there's only so much. Like we're in a house that's fairly established. So, like the direction our kitchen's in and our bedroom's in, I don't know that those are things that are going to change, but I like how you're describing these like tiny tweaks that we can make and how that can, as we were always talking about on here, the subtle things can make a big difference. So
Totally. And that's exactly what it like modern day Vastu is how do I work with what I already have? It's not like most people are not going to be able to like build their Vastu home from scratch. Like in an ideal world, that'd be awesome, but that's not the case for most people. So I think Vastu, the way that I'm learning it is how to apply these principles to what you already have and be able to work with it, which I just love. And I think Ayurveda is so practical in that way. It's like, you don't have to wait for everything to be perfect or have this like perfect built structure that you're creating. It's like, what do you have right now and how can we work with that? And there's so many, like the list is endless of like what we can do. And I'll tell you how I feel because I immediately felt better. Like,
oh, okay.
immediately. And my husband noticed it too. It was like, wow, the light in here was so different. Like it really did open up that northeast wall. And the morning light feels different here. Like it has this easier flow into the house. And like the morning light and the morning wind. And it feels fresh. Like it feels like, oh, it's a new day. I'm like starting my day with this vitality. Whereas before, we would walk downstairs and the first things we see are the couches and we kind of just like, it's just easy to like sink into them and like feel heavy. And here it's like, oh, we're getting all of this, we're absorbing all of this natural light, this like fresh energy, as opposed to before it was really blocked with like heavy, dense qualities. So we immediately both noticed it and like John felt better and I felt better. And I was like, wow, it just feels like refreshing. And I think anytime that we move something in our home, it can create a burst of energy, which I love. This felt different than that. Like this felt like this makes so much sense, which is a theme for learning Ayurveda. I found is like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense and I feel it in my body.
Yeah, like that immediate click. Yeah,
Yes.
I hear that from people all the time and definitely has been a part of my experience as well, for
Yeah,
sure. Yeah.
totally.
I think that's such a powerful thing to have that not just intellectually to understand something. I think as Pitta constitutions, you and I are both people who really like to intellectually understand something, but to intellectually understand it and feel that full body click, it's powerful stuff.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah. Yeah, totally. I felt it. And to see my husband feel it too. Like it wasn't just me knowing he didn't learn it. Like I rearranged the house and he was like, wow, this feels awesome. Like, this is great. So it's neat to see that unfold where he didn't even study it and notice a
Yeah,
difference. So,
cool.
yeah.
That's great. That's really great.
So, yeah, more,
Well,
more to come. But I'm enjoying my new workspace.
good. I'm so glad. I'm so glad. Well, do you want to share a bit about what we're talking about today?
Yes. Today it's funny, we were talking about this in our last episode that we recorded in the Pitta season episode, and we're like, we need to do a whole episode on coffee. And here we are, we're doing a whole episode on coffee. So yeah, this is a big topic. And coffee is a plant, and it's something that comes from the earth, and as like everything that we've been talking about in Ayurveda, it has qualities to it, and we're going to share about those qualities and how we would view them through the Ayurvedic lens. And so I think that our goal for this conversation is not to explore, well, is coffee or good or bad? Should I have it? Should I not have it? I think we're going to add a lot of the nuance to that question because it's not cut and dry in that way. And we get this question a lot. Rita and I have talked a lot offline about this question with clients because it has a really big cultural impact in I mean, basically, it's a legalized drug. Just to
And
get
a
straight to the
normalized
point.
one, right?
Normalized. Yeah. And so
Yeah.
I think a lot of people incorporate it without maybe thinking about it and like thinking how it's impacting how they feel. And that's a lot of what we're going to talk about today is understanding Ayurveda's view of coffee and some of the impacts on the body and what that means, and some that might not be as obvious that we might not know about, and then understanding some of those symptoms, but then ways to balance it, because with anything, it's when we start restricting ourselves from things is when we can become even more disconnected from who we are. And I think Ayurveda and a lot of our conversations have been that there's always ways to make modifications or make adjustments that feel supportive and not feel restrictive or eliminating or, have all these repercussions. There's always options to explore something. And I think the key in what Ayurveda teaches is having the awareness of how does it feel for you? And what are you noticing? And what is your mind telling you? What's your body telling you? And there's a connection between all of those as opposed to, well, is it good or bad? And I think this conversation hopefully will help clarify the Ayurvedic view on coffee and if or when it feels supportive for somebody.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so nuanced. I think you introed that really well. Ayurveda really describes that any plant, any substance can be medicine or poison, right? And so when we think about coffee for some people in certain circumstances and certain quantities, it can be super medicinal. It can have a lot of benefit. And then we're also going to talk about how there are certain symptoms and certain diagnoses and situations where I have found that coffee ends up being one of the major triggers. And when we cut back on coffee, or like you said, we're going to talk a lot about finding middle ground with coffee, it can really make a big difference. And I think to me, like the Ayurvedic lens really offers some clarity on why there's so much controversy in current research about coffee, because there's tons of research out there that will correlate coffee to longevity, to decreasing risks for cancer and diabetes and certain things. And then there's other research that says the opposite, and particularly can speak to how negative it is for the nervous system. And so, yeah, like you said, it's just really nuanced. And so, how Ayurveda looks at coffee is we're looking at it in terms of the qualities. And the qualities of coffee are that it is heating, it's mobilizing, it's drying, it's a little oily. It has that oily factor as well. And I think an important distinction here is all of those qualities are true, even if we're talking about cold brew or iced coffee or decaf or half calf, whatever it may be, we're talking specifically about the coffee bean. And so any variation of coffee is still going to hold these qualities. Perhaps decaf is going to be less mobilizing than full calf, but it's something where Ayurvedically, it's the elements of fire and air that are being increased in the mind and in the body when we're consuming coffee. And so maybe to start off with some situations where that's medicinal and that can be really supportive, it tends to be things in the category of kapha imbalances when we're experiencing sluggishness, physical, mental sluggishness, when we're experiencing water retention. So again, that like diuretic, drying, astringent aspect of coffee, that aspect of coffee that's pulling liquid out of the tissues, that can be supportive if you're having a lot of water retention issues. And so in springtime or in working with individuals with kapha imbalances, kapha constitutions, there absolutely can be cases where it can be really medicinal. And yeah, I'm almost picturing that somebody might be listening to this and they're like in this nervous place of, please tell me that, whatever my constitution, whatever my symptoms are in alignment with coffee being something that's medicinal. And so if what I just described isn't you, if you're not someone in a lot of kapha imbalance and water retention and sluggishness, then again, we're gonna help you find middle ground in this conversation. But those are the main things that come up for me for when it would be really medicinal to bring in coffee. What are your thoughts on that, Brittany?
Yeah, I think you're spot on. I think maybe a distinction with sluggishness, like sluggishness is different than fatigue, right? And so I think to clarify that, because I've seen this a lot in conversation where I've seen very like vata type imbalances, but because that vata, right, is extreme, it burns itself out and then it's flat, right? And then it's like so fatigued. And I think a lot of people can misinterpret that fatigue as a kapha imbalance because it's that heavy quality, but it's really like vata trying to compensate for burnout. So that's a difference between sluggishness. And I think like the sluggishness you're describing is the body's feeling heavy, right? It's not necessarily like the yeah, how would I describe that? Like a difference between like sluggishness and fatigue of like how it feels. Like I think sluggishness is like you need a little bit more oomph to get going, whereas like fatigue is like I need to sleep for an entire day to feel better.
Hmm.
So maybe it's that like inner motivational piece of sluggishness is really more in alignment with you kind of just like need a push to get going and then you're gonna get going, whereas fatigue is like I'm depleted and I've given everything and I have nothing left. So difference there where like the sluggishness piece is a part of that more kapha type imbalance, and that heaviness feeling where coffee could help kind of just get you moving again.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really important distinction because I think that's probably one of the main ways that people utilize coffee is for fatigue. And I think it's important that we're having that full awareness of how coffee and really all caffeine supports us when we're fatigued. To bring in a little bit of more of the modern science lens, the neurotransmitter lens, coffee, caffeine, it blocks adenosine, which is the neurotransmitter that essentially alerts us when we're tired, when we're fatigued, when we need more rest. And so essentially, when we're drinking coffee and caffeine, we're kind of masking or bypassing the body's request for rest. And I totally get and totally understand that there's certain circumstances where we might have to do that. Like we have certain responsibilities with our family, with our work, whatever it may be. We're traveling, we have to drive, like certain situations where we may need to pull that in. But I think it's important to have that distinction and have that awareness of that because it's almost something where I remember at one point I was drinking like multiple lattes a day, like a whole lot of caffeine. And I would have the mindset that, oh, I'm tired because I haven't had enough coffee today. Right. And I guess what I want to make that distinction that it's not just that we're lacking in caffeine. It's oftentimes the body is asking for rest and asking for us to slow down. And I'll just say too, I think this is a really important conversation, specifically when we're talking about certain things like concussion recovery. And this is a big factor that I've brought up with clients is I think oftentimes people are using caffeine because they're having this low energy and this fatigue. And I think it can really get in the way of connecting with and listening to the body when the body is saying, hey, I need less stimulation, I need more rest. So it's yeah, like I said, we're all human and we're all gonna have situations where we need to bring in caffeine, especially in the systems that we live within. But I just want to make that point of distinction that the energy that we're feeling is because we're blocking that ability for our brain to tell us and fully feel that tiredness.
Yeah. Yeah, it's such a good point and like so common. Like I've totally heard that before what you're saying, like, oh, I didn't drink enough coffee and this is why I'm tired. Well, it is like a band-aid, right? It's just like bypassing what's actually going on. And just so culturally accepted that that's why you're tired is because you didn't have enough coffee. So yeah, I get it. And I think there's seasons of life where just even thinking about like young parents or new parents, there's always going to be seasons where like balance looks different in different ways. What we're sharing is, take it and apply it to your situation because it's not a yes or no answer. It's all this nuance behind it. And yeah, go ahead.
Well, no, I was just gonna say, yeah. I mean, I think of when you bring up the new parent situation, I think of systemically, we should have more supports in place to support parents, but we're not there yet, right? And so we want to be cautious of just accepting things always the way that they are and normalizing that, oh, yeah, like we just need to drink tons of caffeine to get through our day. Where in reality, it's like, well, what do we need to change about our world so that we all don't need to be drugging ourselves up every day to get through?
Yes. Thank you for clarifying that. Like that's a whole nother episode, I think, of just what you're describing. And really like the root of the problem is being a new parent is not a problem. It's that there's no support,
Yeah.
like you're saying. So yeah, thank you for calling that out. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Sorry, I
No,
jumped in with my
I'm glad
fire.
you clarified that. Like it's a good reminder, right? Because I think that is the reality that probably won't change for a long time in our society. So we have to like learn how to work with the system. Not to go on a tangent on this, but like, yeah, I think it is a good reminder of not just going along with what's acceptable according to modern standards.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So, yeah, I think there's lots of systemic things that aren't changing anytime soon, right? And so, with that, we are thinking about the right now. And I think many people are finding that in their right now situation, that caffeine and coffee are something that they're not looking to possibly change. I do want to talk about some of the specific symptoms that we can see going on that could be very directly impacted by coffee use. So, specific imbalances in Ayurveda, we'd say specific pitta and some vata imbalances that when we see this going on, it causes us as practitioners to raise more of that red flag on the coffee use. Where if these aren't going on, it's like, sure, like enjoy your coffee. But specifically, when we see things like hyperacidity in the stomach and specifically GI inflammation and irritation, so that could be things like sour stomach and acid reflux on more of the upper part of the GI tract. It could be things like loose stool or loose frequent stool in the lower part of the GI tract. Specifically, things like Crohn's disease, I think, is a really prime example of this when those are going on, that is a big part of what coffee does is it brings this acidity and heat into the GI tract. And so it very much gets things moving. And I think many people will experience that it can support them in having a bowel movement. But again, it's doing that through bringing in these heating, mobilizing qualities. And if that's what's already going on in your GI tract, it can really be a driver there. So that's a symptomology that I think we really want to look at coffee habits and possibly make some shifts there. The other piece that really goes along with that is when we're seeing skin issues like rashes, acne, redness in the skin, rosacea in the skin. Those are all indications that there's that inflammation of the inner mucosa, and we're seeing that in the outer skin. And so, same idea is that we want to look at finding ways to balance out and reduce that level of heat and acidity we're bringing into the body.
Yeah, totally. And it brings us back to some conversations we've had where we know that the skin is the byproduct of the blood, right? And the blood is what's feeding all of our tissues and our nutrition, right? And so if we're seeing these heat imbalances on the skin, we're like, oh, this is a reflection of what is going on in my blood. So we know that the blood has this excess heat. And as we're describing these qualities of the coffee bean, right? Like the oily, the spreading, the fire, the intensity, that's the qualities that are being represented in the blood, and they're showing up as those skin imbalances. And so again, this is why we come back to digestion, where like what we are taking into the body is becoming and showing up in these other tissues in our body, because that's the path that it takes to develop the cells. So Ayurveda always comes back to digestion and like how we're taking things in. And if what we're taking in, to your point at the beginning, Rita, is it causing more harm or is it creating balance? And in this case, if you're seeing those types of imbalances on the skin, that is an indication that fire is in excess. So, yeah, I think it's a great example of how what we're taking in really has an impact on us at a cellular level and how our tissues are developing, especially with something like coffee. And weren't you saying in the last episode that that's what you were noticing with the
Mm.
skin imbalances directly related to coffee?
Yeah. So essentially, I used to drink a ton of coffee, gave it up for a 3-week experiment to see if it was a factor in anxiety. And then when I tried to go back, it essentially, my body said no thank you, and I started experiencing redness of the skin and total return of that anxiety, that jitteriness. But yeah, I think my pitta constitution, I think skin is a I think we all have like certain tissues in certain areas that we're more sensitive, and I think it's a way that my body communicates with me very easily is through my skin. And yeah, coffee, it just was immediately bright red, and it all over too, like my face, my whole body, really. I was experiencing that redness. Yeah.
Yeah, and that spreading quality, right? It's not
Yeah.
just like one area; it's like moves around and moves really quickly.
Yeah.
It's fire, essentially
Yeah.
fire. So, yeah.
It's interesting though, because I have heard this from clients. Like I mentioned Crohn's disease. I've worked with a couple people with Crohn's disease, and in both cases, both clients fully gave up coffee and replaced it with different herbal drinks instead. And in one case, similar to my experience, this person, when they went back to coffee just to like have a cup at a cafe once in a while, they found it had such a huge impact. They immediately had that urgent loose stool. And so I just find that so fascinating from experience that it can be something where you don't notice that it's having this extreme effect. And then when you give it up and you can really see how it's fully manifesting in the body, because I think coffee is extreme, it's intense. Like you can think of a lot of foods and herbs that have these subtle qualities in the body. They're slightly warming, they're cooling, they're a little moistening, they're a little drying, but coffee is intense in its qualities. So, yeah, I think if you're somebody who is a little more sensitive, it's something that coffee is going to impact you that much more. But again, I think for most of us, we might not realize how much it's impacting us unless we take a break.
Yeah, totally. That's a great example.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm. Yeah. And so maybe we can talk about the vata piece of it too. And like you're describing earlier at the beginning, it's more like that mobile quality and that drying quality that comes into play. And that can be expressed as, like you're saying, anxiety and jumpy thoughts and a racing mind. I would even put in there insomnia or like not
Mm,
sleeping well. And I think that's an overlooked piece where, like, oh, but I have 1 cup in the morning. Well, certain people, caffeine stays in certain people's systems for over 24 hours. Um, and there's different studies out there on the length, that time that it stays in someone's body. And so you might not think it's impacting your sleep because you had that small cup in the morning, but if you're, just as you're describing, a more sensitive constitution, that could really be sticking around and increasing, cortisol and stress and nervous system, it just having this mobile quality be more present for a longer period of time than you might expect. And I think that can be very overlooked. It's like, oh, but I just had 1 cup in the morning, so like no problem. I think if you are, even with that 1 cup, noticing sleep disturbances, I would certainly look at coffee as where can we adjust that to see if it makes a difference in your sleep. Because like the opposite of that is if a kapha person has a cup of coffee and is able to take a nap, well, that could be an indication that like coffee is not really affecting them in the same way that it is
mm,
someone that can't sleep at night because they had 1 cup in the morning.
mm,
So I think tuning into those nuances and not just a blanket statement of it, this is how it is for everyone and this is what people can do with coffee. It's very individualized.
mm. Yeah. Yeah, and the important piece of that too, when we talk about anxiety in the nervous system, is how we think of how part of what coffee does is it's releasing our stress hormones, our cortisol or adrenaline, right? So it's something where if it's the first thing we're having in the morning, especially, that's going to cause that major spike in those stress hormones. And that's kind of setting the precedence for the day. So I do think it's something when I'm working with clients who are experiencing anxiety, we're checking in with how that might be playing a role.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd say what I've seen too is typically those constitutions that are more prone to anxiety type emotion. I mean, everyone's prone to it, we're all human in that capacity and can experience all of these things. But I think if you have a tendency for it, it can be a sign that like you are maybe more sensitive to these things that are more intense.
Mm,
And coffee, like you're saying, is a pretty intense one.
mm,
Um, so, and along with that, right, we're looking at excess mobile quality being present, and that can also dry us out, right? And that creates that dryness piece. So, yeah, I think there's different ways we can see dryness, but even showing up on the skin can be an indication of that as well. Especially if you're in a season that's not dry and you're having dry skin, that can be a flag for looking further into that. Um, and yeah, dryness also, like not sleeping at night, is a sign of excess mobility, which, if we think about how the wind works, when there's excess wind, it sucks moisture out of things, right? It sucks moisture out of the earth or the leaves, or like I think about my porch when it gets wet in a rainstorm and then it gets windy, well, like the porch dries super fast because the wind is just sucking out that moisture. It's the same thing in the body. So when we're having excess wind, it's taking out all that moisture, and we can feel that in the mind, right? We can feel that excess mobility and wind in the mind creating dryness. And we talk about that too if we're like making climbing plans and the it rains and we're like, well, when is the cliff going to be dry? Well, it's going to be windy tomorrow, so I think it'll dry out pretty fast.
mm.
So it's there in the elements and in the environment the same way that it is in our bodies.
Well, and I like to compare those elements to our hormones as well, and bringing it back to the stress hormone piece. Our stress hormones are really drying and mobilizing. When we think about cortisol and adrenaline, that's part of the effect they have in the body. They're heating, drying, mobilizing, versus what we think of as our sex hormones, estrogen, progesterone. Those are more stabilizing and grounding and lubricating and building. And so it's that same idea. If we're bringing in more of those mobilizing, drying, heating qualities through coffee, and we know through modern science that that increases the production of these stress hormones, it can contribute to some imbalances in our hormonal cycles. And it can impact, our estrogen, progesterone, things of that nature, because the body essentially is always going to take priority of our stress over reproduction. So, yeah, it's kind of a fun dance to go between the examples in nature and then what we can understand in the body through modern science.
Yeah, and to add to that, I think something else that's overlooked in understanding coffee and how it's impacting us is our blood sugar. And just as you're describing, Rita, that spike in cortisol and adrenaline, well, what happens when we get that spike is that the liver is signaled to then release glucose into the bloodstream, right? So that's what spikes our blood sugar. And so I don't think that's as commonly known for people. They think like, "Oh yeah, of course it increases cortisol. That makes sense." And the blood sugar piece is important as well because like especially if you're not having it with food. I think that's the key there. And we'll talk about some ways to balance. But if you're constantly getting this huge cortisol, adrenaline, and blood sugar spike, like first thing in the morning, and that's how you're starting your day, that is for sure impacting all of these other hormones in the cascade of hormones, including circadian rhythm, right? Stress, sex hormones, all of that is being impacted by this like massive spike in the morning. So I think it's an important one to talk about because I've seen a lot of clients like really surprised when I tell them that and they're like, I didn't know it impacts my blood sugar. Like I never thought about that. So I think that's an important one to call out.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. And, I will say, so we're like half an hour, 40 minutes into this episode, and I'm kind of laughing at us because before we hit record, Brittni and I will usually do a quick check-in and say, any thoughts, any intentions for the tone of this episode? What do we want to make sure we're saying or not saying? And I came in today and said, I just want to make sure we don't come on too strong and too hot and be super anti-coffee. And I feel like that's exactly what we've done. And I guess I want to clarify that we very much, like, I understand all of the reasons people love coffee and utilize coffee. I think I have these strong opinions on it because I've seen it impact so many of my clients in ways that are really surprising. Like, again, people will sometimes with the seasonal cleanses, the digestive resets that I run, people will plan to just give up coffee for a short period of time in that reset and then come around and say, whoa, like I had no idea how much that was impacting me or how much has changed just from taking that break from coffee. So it's it's tough because it's something where I'm someone who's always wanting to offer middle ground and tread lightly and about conversations compassionately because I think there's enough in our culture that's telling us what we shouldn't do or creating shame. But I guess I maybe ended up being more candid than I planned in terms of sharing my true feelings on coffee because I do think for many people it is a driver in imbalance. But whether you're somebody experiencing all of those symptoms in the nervous system, in your GI tract, in sleep, in dryness, in skin redness, whether you are somebody experiencing those symptoms or not, I do think that there's ways that we can find middle ground if you're someone who's not interested in experimenting with cutting back on coffee. And yeah, we should transition to that. But I did want to give that little bit of a disclaimer and just honor and recognize that I think we did come in a little hot, but
Yeah.
yeah, it's also I think a conversation that maybe needs to happen.
Totally. Yeah. And Rita, it's tough, right? Because It's it's a hard balance to gauge because every person has a different relationship with coffee, right? So there is some of this like sussing out, well, what's going to be most supportive for this person? Is it going cold turkey? Is it weaning off? Is it creating a different balance with coffee? Is it having it with food? Like there's all these different ways that we're going to go through of like balancing that you can try. But it's a hard one because people love their coffee and I get it. I used to love coffee too, and I haven't drank coffee in 6 years. Um, and so I understand what it's like to stop drinking coffee or to try and not have coffee or to like take it out as my go-to. So I totally get it when I'm working with clients and that's how they're feeling because I've been through it myself and found it really hard. And now, 6 years later, like I don't think about it anymore. Like I don't crave coffee and that took some time, right? It wasn't an overnight like it was hard. It was really hard. But same to your point, Rita, I noticed I felt so much better in my body and in my mind when
Mm,
I wasn't having coffee. And that was like a very quick difference in my energy. Honestly,
mm,
once I went through that adjustment period, I had more stable energy as opposed to like crashes or swings. And I really don't get that anymore.
yeah.
And haven't had that for years. And that was maybe one of my most significant uh observations in transitioning off of coffee was that my energy levels. I had built energy instead of borrowed energy.
Mm,
And that was a game changer for all of these other health things I was trying to figure out.
yeah. Built versus borrowed is a really good way to put that. I like that a lot. Well, so maybe this will be motivating for some people to experiment with that, right? And go cold turkey or wean off. But let's talk about some of the ways that maybe you're just adding things to your coffee or switching how you're drinking it or when you're drinking it and how that can come into play. You mentioned earlier that not having it on an empty stomach is a big one. And I just want to reiterate that it's a very different experience for the nervous system and for the GI tract if we're having our cup of coffee with breakfast, with a little bit of food in our stomach versus having it first thing on an empty stomach. So that in itself is huge, where ideally, if you can have something to ease your digestion awake. So, like maybe a little bit of warm water or a little herbal tea, or maybe warm water with a squeeze of lime or lemon, a little something like that to ease into your day, and then have your breakfast and your coffee with your breakfast. That's going to be a really different experience in the body. So, that is one that I think is important and in itself can make a huge difference. The other is adding some fat to your coffee. So, a little bit of ghee, or if you don't do dairy, then you could do some coconut oil. Adding in a little bit of fat, on one hand, it's going to balance the dryness a bit. It's going to bring in a little bit more of that lubrication. It's also interesting when we bring in fat, it can help slow the delivery of caffeine to the bloodstream. So, again, it can help make it a little bit less of a hit to the body and also balance out a little bit of that acidity when we're talking about the impact on the stomach and the GI tract. And then sweetener too. Like it's interesting. I think in our culture, we're used to always wanting to cut back on sweets. And, there's a time and a place for that. But what's interesting is in Ayurvedic medicine, we actually use sugar medicinally in some cases. Like certain herbal formulas will have jaggery, which is cane sugar, in it because it can balance out the heat and acidity in the GI tract. And so adding some maple syrup to coffee can be a way to balance out some of that acidity too.
Yeah, I love that. And going back to your first point, if we're having it on an empty stomach, if we think about what's in the stomach in the morning, right, it's trying to like build agni, right? The natural fire is like waking up for the day. And so if we just like hit that with a really acidic hot drink like coffee, it's gonna like take that gentle, gradual fire and just like incinerate what's around it, right? So I think about it kind of breaking down that mucosal lining of the stomach that's supposed to protect the stomach from a fire. It's actually going to start burning it, right? And that can lead to like ulcers and holes in the stomach. So obviously over time, right, it's not going to happen immediately, but like that wears down that protective tissue that's in the stomach that's made to allow that fire to burn well. It's going to actually break it down. So yeah, I think adding those things, and even sometimes having like a little bit of ghee with my water is what I'll
Mm,
have in the morning, so that there is adding some lubrication already before I'm taking something in. Ghee is nice too because it supports that natural enkindling of the digestive fire without creating heat. So, yeah, I think like you're describing, just setting it up for success in a better way by understanding where the tissues in the body are and how they might be impacted by what's coming into them and what we're ingesting.
mm. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and the other one I like to add to coffee is cardamom. So cardamom, it's one of my favorite culinary spices, but it's cooling. I mean, it's a little warming at the same time. Like it has some pungency, but it's also cooling, and so that can balance off a little bit of the heating acidity quality, but it also supports Apana, so it supports the downward flow of energy in the body. So if we think about coffee as being this like really mobilizing plant that is going to move energy in all directions and upward, a little bit of cardamom. I mean, it's subtle, but the intention is there to bring it downward, and it's pretty tasty to do that. But yeah, the other thing I'll talk about with clients is just cutting back. So maybe if you're somebody who does the coffee in the morning and the afternoon, maybe we're trying to find a substitute for the afternoon drink. And I think at the end of the day, coffee is really all about the ritual. Right?
Hmm.
Like, I think it's different for different people. And for some people, it's maybe the energy. For some people, maybe they make really yummy dessert like coffees. And it's kind of the treat. I think for some people, it's just the ritual of sitting down and having this beverage. And so I think whenever I'm working with someone to reduce or cut back or eliminate, we're always trying to replace that with something that is also tasty and also going to give you that same experience. So sometimes that's an herbal blend. There are some bitter herbs that can have that coffee taste, like dandelion root, burdock, different blends that have those and others that can give you that same like bitter drink that you can then add sweetness to. Or, even looking at caffeine that's not quite as much of a hit as compared to coffee. Like we can look at different teas or chai or matcha or mate that are still giving you the caffeine, but it's a little bit of a step down. It's still going to bring those same qualities that we've talked about, like little heating, mobilizing, drying, but not quite to the same extent that coffee does.
Yeah, I've heard it described where coffee depletes your yin, right?
Mm,
And so coffee is depleting that yin energy, where something like a chai or even a mate would be more gentle on the system. So yes, you're still having caffeine in that, but it's not this like sucking out of the good things that we want there too,
yeah.
which coffee can really have that huge impact on. These other options are a little more gentle, and to your point, that's exactly was the hard part for me, was the ritual. Like I remember
Mm,
just I would wake up, I'd want to like, because I like having like half an hour in the morning to just like stay in my pajamas and like have some downtime and have a cozy cup of coffee. And I was like, this is so like this is just what I looked forward to. And so I switched to chai, and I would have it like cream, it was like creamy, and made sure there was milk, and it still like gave me that like, oh, I just want to like cozy up and like, settle into the day and like wake up a little bit. And like that was a nice transition. That felt really easy to do and helpful, because it was that ritual. It wasn't even like the coffee itself. It was the ritual and the habit and the feeling. And so to your point, I think finding clarity on, well, is it the coffee for someone? Is it the ritual? Like what's the whole picture there of what someone's seeking in that moment that feels supportive? Because it might be more than the coffee.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think it's always more than the coffee. Yeah. 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 And okay, so I guess to kind of summarize here, I think everybody probably knows how Brittany and I feel about coffee now because we were pretty candid. But I think it's important to understand what's happening in the body with this drink that just becomes background noise when we think about so many aspects of our health, but perhaps is playing a bigger role than we realized. So I think in summary, our recommendations, if you are someone experiencing some of those extreme pitta and or vata imbalances, that may be worth it to look at weaning off completely, at taking a break, at, experimenting with what it feels like to be off coffee. And I think if you're not somebody who's in that place, it might also be interesting to experiment that way or try some of these middle ground options and yeah, just again, see how it feels, see how it lands, and sorry that we came for your coffee.
Yeah, and I will say one more thing to reiterate for folks, because I see this a lot. And like, if you try it one way and it's feeling really hard, like, can you roll with that challenge, or do you want to try it a different way first? And like, don't feel bad about that. You can try it different ways. It doesn't have to be like, oh, I couldn't go cold turkey, so I guess I'm just going to keep drinking coffee because I can't do it. Right? I think there is this aspect of giving yourself some flexibility to like, okay, this is probably going to be hard because it's something I'm used to. How can I make this supportive over time?
Yeah,
And not just like, this has to happen tomorrow. It's give
yeah.
yourself some grace. We're all, humans right? I think, Rita, what's you're saying, you're like, it's very human of
It's
you.
very human of you. Yeah, it's very
So
human of you.
remembering that through this process, and that it's a process, and like, it's trying something new. And whenever we try something new, it's always going to be very hard the first time. It's always going to take longer the first time, but then we get better at it. And I think the important piece of this conversation is like, how does it feel for you? Because it's very individual. And so exploring that and getting curious about it. And if weaning off is the option, like, I've had clients just like, I'm going to wean off a quarter cup a week,
Yeah.
right? Like, that is very approachable. And it takes a little bit of discipline and takes some time, but then your new normal is like a quarter cup less than what you're used to.
Mhm.
And then the
Mhm.
next week it's a quarter cup less. And so you can keep working your way down. It doesn't have to be if we do things in an extreme way, we can create more imbalance.
Yeah.
And so I think with something like coffee, especially for the vata pittas out there, be gentle with yourself and take the slow road. And we are here for it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I like that idea of maybe fourth a cup a week. That's a good tip to end on because I think that just feels really doable compared to this idea of going cold turkey. So,
Yes. And let us
yeah.
know. Like, try some things out. Leave us some comments in Patreon. We want to hear what people are trying, and let's help other people out there know that other people are trying to, or like
Sure.
experimenting, right? Like, we're all in this together and we're all humans. So let's support each other through these hard but somewhat simple things, I guess.
Yeah, sure. Sure. Yeah.
Cool. Well, thanks, Rita.
Yeah. Thanks, Brittany.
If you enjoyed today's episode, it would mean the world to us and help support our work if you'd like, share, leave a review, as well as subscribe to our podcast on whichever platform you use. If you're looking for more connection or would like to support this podcast, we'd love to have you join our Patreon for $5 a month. Here you'll get bonus episodes and access to our community chat Q&A.
And don't forget to check out our wellness library, which is filled with self-guided classes, kitchen tutorials, herbal recipes, and more Ayurvedic practices, all for just $5 a month. Thanks so much for being here with us. Until next time, be well.